one name that a lot of teams, a lot of fans were looking at that had really admired based on his growth this year. It was one Naz Reid, but the Minnesota Timberwolves decided to act fast and sign Reid to a 3-year, $42 million deal. So tell us how all this transpired.
Yeah, CP, it was kind of really the culmination of a year long kind of negotiation between Naz Reid and the Timberwolves. They, obviously have Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns in front of Naz in the front court rotation. And so I do know that there were several teams out there in the league that were believing that they would at least get a chance to talk to Naz Reid in free agency to pitch him on either more money than the Wolves could offer or a bigger role right away with maybe a starting spot or certainly bigger minutes than maybe might be built into what he has in Minnesota. And really, what it came down to was the Timberwolves looked at Naz Reid and said, this is one of the great player development stories that this franchise has ever had, going from an undrafted rookie free agent to a critical piece of their rotation. And he's a fan favorite. The players love him, the coaches love him. And so they really just felt like they wanted to be aggressive and get a deal done and avoid having to compete with other teams in free agency. So I think they went a little bit above what they planned on spending on Naz Reid, but all in all, they feel really good about being able to keep a guy who's been here for 4 years, great worker, great part of this organization, and really, really skilled. He's gotten better and better every single year. And so, yeah, I'm sure there are a few teams out there that are a little disappointed right now that they can't go after Naz Reid.
And so with like Naz Reid's re-signing, what do you think were his biggest improvements for the Timberwolves to keep him around?
Yeah, it's a couple of things with him. I mean, one is he has gradually developed a handle that is really among the best of any big man in the league, starter or bench. I mean, he can break a guy down on the perimeter and get past him and throw down some explosive dunks. He's really reshaped his body since coming into the league. He's lost over 30 pounds, really turned himself into a kind of a lean and mean machine that way. And so he is much more athletic, much more explosive than he was when he first came into the league. And that has helped him to be able to play both small ball center and power forward, which is obviously a huge thing for the Timberwolves, because if he could only play center, the odds that they would want to spend this kind of money on a backup five when you already have Towns and Gobert, pretty minimal. But because he showed last year that he has the versatility to play some four along with the five, I think that he showed that he has more value to the franchise than just being a backup five. And so I think that just coupled with his overall attitude and work ethic and kind of commitment, it was a player that they thought that they really wanted to keep around, and they wanted to show the rest of the team and the league that, hey, we reward players for putting in the hard work and becoming really good players in this league. And Naz Reid has done that.
And certainly has. And as you said, the growth and development was one that the entire organization took stock in, from the ownership on down to the general manager and to the coach. Where do you see the areas of improvement where Naz Reid needs to improve his game? I mean, now he's going to be earning a lot more, so the expectations are certainly going to be higher.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really good story when he's on a minimum deal and producing the way that he was. Very much kind of low pressure situation. Now that he is making money, there are going to be more expectations on him, and he is going to have to play. There were times last year where maybe they just stuck more with Towns and Gobert and kind of pushed Reid into a very minimal role at times. That's not going to be the case now that you're spending this kind of money on him. And so what they need from Reid is they need a little more consistent rebounding. There will be games where he piles up a bunch of boards, but really he played 68 games last year. Only 4 times was he in double digits in rebounds. They want him to be more of a factor on the glass. Secondly, he fouls a little too much. And so on defense, being able to stay in front of guys and not get bullied by bigger centers or not get kind of beaten to a spot by quicker power forwards and forced to foul them and put the team in disadvantageous positions. That's going to be another point of emphasis for Naz. They would also like if he could tick up the 3-point shooting just a little bit more. I think he's at around 34% last season. That could get up to 35, 36%. Then it becomes even more of a weapon. So there are areas that they want him to improve. But they really do believe in his work ethic. He's taken leaps every single summer. He stays in Minnesota for most of the year, working out and doing those things. And so they're pretty confident that he's going to keep rolling.
How significant do you think his loss, or his non-presence in the playoffs was against the Nuggets?
Yeah, it's a good point, Alex. I mean, they definitely did miss him and Jaden McDaniels in the playoffs. They lose to the Nuggets in 5 games. There was a real belief that Naz Reid was a matchup nightmare for the Nuggets with that second unit. Whenever Jokic would go out and the Wolves would play the Nuggets with Naz Reid, they crushed Denver in the non-Jokic minutes. That did not happen in this playoff series because they did not have the same kind of energy and juice coming off of the bench to really kind of tip the scales in their favor. Even though Jokic was playing a lot of minutes, they still needed to win them and win them in a big margin to have a chance in that series, and they just didn't. And so having Naz Reid would have helped that a great deal. Now the big question becomes, how do they make all of this work financially with Naz, with Rudy Gobert making $41 million next year, with Cat making $36 million next year? There's a lot of money invested in that front court, and we'll have to see if they can keep those 3 together or if they're going to eventually have to make a move with one of those guys.
Well, once again, we're talking to John Krasinski, who covers the Minnesota Timberwolves for The Athletic. And John, that's the next question I have here is because based on your article, it seems like there was certainly a sense of urgency here for the Minnesota Timberwolves to sign Naz Reid. It's a pretty significant deal. You know, people like myself, I thought he was going to be around that $12 million mid-level exception, but they certainly upped the ante a little bit there, plus a third-year player option, so he has some flexibility there as well. But with that, that's $440+ million invested in your front court. I mean, unless Naz Reid is going to play some at the 3, as you said, he's going to have to play. But then if they have to sign Edwards and they have to sign McDaniels, where does that leave Towns, Gobert? I mean, what do you think the future holds for those guys?
Yeah, it's about to get really interesting here. And essentially, they have one more season to figure this all out. The new collective bargaining agreement, with its much more stringent penalties on big spenders, on luxury tax spenders, doesn't kick in until 2024, 2025. And that is also when Karl Anthony Towns' big extension kicks in. It's also when any extensions due to Ant and McDaniels that might come this summer will kick in. And so they have just a little bit of breathing room over the next calendar year to really figure that out. And they have said publicly that they want to start the season running it back with the core that they had last season. And because Towns missed 52 games, Rudy missed some time, they want to see this team together, fully healthy, before they make any really big and drastic changes to it. I still think that, is there a possibility sometime this summer another team makes a big offer for one of their guys and they say, okay, let's do it? I think there's a chance, because sooner or later they're going to have to pay the piper with all of this money that they are investing. They're going to go into the luxury tax. And I don't think any team wants to be there unless they are championship contenders. And so you would think that whether it's this summer, whether it's during the season before the trade deadline, or at the end of next season going into the draft time, they are going to have to make a decision on, do you keep Naz? Do you keep Rudy? Do you keep Cat? One of those 3 guys you would think would have to be dealt at least to sort of take some of the financial pressure off with some of the other big money that's going to be paid to a lot of young guys. So I don't think it's an immediate danger, but it's certainly something that is right on their minds and that they are weighing as they go forward here.
But John, Do you think that's a wise investment for the Timberwolves right now, where you see the offseason right now, where you have CP3 going to the Warriors? You see how the Phoenix Suns got Bradley Beal. Do you think it's right for the Timberwolves just to run it back, or should they just try to strike now and just try to clean the books, because it may be even more difficult to move Karl Anthony Towns down the line, considering, and also you got to have it into consideration that the Wolves did play better while he was out to some degree.
Well, so yeah, I would say this. I think that it all depends on what their options are in terms of let's just say for instance that they have decided, which I don't believe they have, but let's just say for the sake of argument, they decide, you know what, we do have to move Karl Anthony Towns now. Like it's time to move on. It's time to get what we can get for him, and then move forward with more of an Anthony Edwards centric team. Well, there's making that decision, but then there's also making sure that you recoup the good value for your investment. And if there is not a scenario out there right now where a team wants to commit serious draft capital and maybe a good young player or two for Karl Anthony Towns, then I think your decision is made for you, and you just ride it out a little bit. And maybe as the season begins next year, Karl Anthony Towns is healthy, he plays a lot better, the team responds, then the value would come up for him. The value would also come up for Rudy Gobert, who, let's face it, is coming off of a very underwhelming season. And so he doesn't have a whole lot of trade value with his contract right now. And so in some ways, even if they wanted to make a move this summer, they may be dealing from a position of weakness a little bit in terms of the value of some of their guys. Now, what would be difficult for them, I think, is if a team came to them. Maybe it's your Knicks. Maybe it's Portland. Maybe it's there's a bunch of teams out there that might come Dallas and say, hey, here is a really attractive offer for Towns. Like, say no to me. That might be a different scenario, but I think that they do have some time to play this out a little bit longer if they want to start the season and see if maybe everything comes together much better than it did last year. Last year was so disjointed. Cat and Rudy both missed most of training camp. Then Towns goes down with the calf injury. Rudy was in and out just a little bit. They never seem to really have any extended time together. And so if you give them a little bit more time, maybe they'll end up looking great, be a challenge for a top 4 seed in the West, and then make it a lot easier for them to either trade Cat or Rudy, or maybe you can still, Naz Reid's contract is going to be very tradable. So that just gives them some more options than maybe it might look like they have right now.
What do you, based on your opinion, where do things stand from a relationship standpoint with Towns and the organization? I mean, his name has come up in trade rumors all off season since it started, whether it's Portland to Dame, Cat to the Knicks is always strong. There's reports that he's buying real estate apartments in New York. So, the rumors are flying there. Based on your opinion, where do things stand with Cat and the organization?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, and I've had conversations with people on all sides of this, I think that, Karl Anthony Towns would like to be here in Minnesota. He loves playing with Anthony Edwards. He has a really good relationship with Rudy Gobert. He has good relationships with a lot of the players on the team, and he has a lot of respect for Chris Finch as a head coach. And so I know that there's always been, really over the last maybe 3 to 4 years, I think there's been a collective wondering, when would Karl Anthony Towns look at what's been around him in Minnesota and say, you know what, this isn't it. I need to go somewhere else. We've seen a ton of stars make those kinds of declarations and try and force their issue on the way out. So far here, there's been no indication of that. Towns wants to make it work in Minnesota. He wants to be here for the long term. And so I don't think that there's any strains or anything with that. I think that the biggest key to that is that he and Edwards get along very, very well. And, there's always this conversation of, well, whose team is it? And who's, can they share the spotlight? I do think that they can both coexist together very, very well. So to me, the question becomes for the Timberwolves, is not, hey, do we want Karl Anthony Towns here? Do we want to have a long-term relationship with him and keep him around from a basketball standpoint? It's purely, can they afford to financially? And that's a decision that they will have to make ultimately. And so if something were to happen short-term, long-term with Towns or with Rudy Gobert, I do believe that it would be just them realizing, look, we've got to change the financial picture of this team to meet it. And it would be less about personalities or basketball fits or anything like that.
Now, John, the Timberwolves do have 2 rookies that they got from the draft this year. One being Leonard Miller. The other is Jalen Clark. What are your thoughts about these 2 prospects right here for the Timberwolves?
Yeah, so one of the side effects of the Rudy Gobert trade that they made last year is that they did not have a first round pick this summer in the draft, and so they went into the draft with 1 second round pick, number 53, very low. And so they went and traded 2 future seconds to go up to 33 and get Leonard Miller, who they really, really like. They think that, he's a big dude, 6'10", super athletic, really good, hard-nosed rebounder, the kind of body type that this roster lacks. They want more explosion with their bigs. They want more size and wingspan and muscle. And Leonard Miller has that. And so he was really impressive over the second half of of last season's G League season with G League Unite. And there were plenty of people. Sam Vecini from The Athletic had him 13th on his board. And so I think there's a lot of optimism that in a year or two, Miller can really develop into a good, strong rotational piece for them and give them a dimension that they don't have athletically. And then with Jalen Clark, number 53, that was purely a value play there because Clark blew out his Achilles in March and is recovering from surgery there. And so they're going to be very patient with him and may, how much he plays this upcoming season is yet to be determined, but it may not be very much. But when healthy, they think that he is a first round talent and he's got, he's one of the best defensive prospects in the draft. He was an Best Defensive Player of the Year, a great perimeter defender. And so getting him into the team's program, helping him rehab that Achilles, and then maybe in a year, he will be ready to help out. It seems like it made a lot of sense to take a chance on him there because he is so talented. It's just about getting him back healthy again.
Once again, we're talking to John Krasinski, Timberwolves insider for The Athletic. Salute to everybody in the chat. Hit that thumbs up button for your boys. Hit that like button. We are talking about the Timberwolves re-signing of Naz Reid and what the offseason looks like for this team. And John, from a salary cap standpoint, with them just having signed Naz Reid, where do they stand as free agency approaches on this Friday on the 30th? Is it just taxpayer mid-level plus vet minimums, or how do things look from a cap standpoint?
Yeah, they have a little bit of flexibility. They have Taurean Prince's contract is non-guaranteed for next year. I believe it has to be guaranteed by Thursday. So that is for $7.5 million. They could trade that and create some room that way and get another player back. They could waive him, create some more flexibility and cap space that way, or they could keep him because he's a good player that helps off the bench and is a nice leader in that locker room. So I think what they ultimately end up doing with him is going to dictate a lot of their spending power and their ability to make things happen on the free agent market. They have the potential of getting up close to $12 million, close to that mid-level exception in spending power. But you have Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who's a restricted free agent. They would like to have him back. I think that they have looked at and are trying to consider some other possibilities, some other wing possibilities. But with signing Naz Reid, it's going to be a little bit harder for them to attract, a kind of top 7 guy to get in here. So it might be bring back Nickeil Alexander-Walker on a nice deal, and then look to see if there is another backup point guard to address that issue, because they have Mike Conley, really, really good starter, but they don't want to play him heavy minutes, and they need someone to help in that regard, because Jordan McLaughlin certainly slipped last season after having a calf injury himself. And so I think that's going to be the priority, but they are not one of those teams armed with a whole bunch of money to spend on the market. So they're going to have to go value shopping a little bit here.
We have a question from our Twitter user. The Cooler asks, is Josh Minott a player that could be available given that the Timberwolves did draft Leonard Miller?
Yeah, so Josh Minott is a second-round pick from last year from Memphis. He is not available as far as I know, unless it were to be like in a big, as a part of a package for a big deal for them to go get someone. They really like his potential. He is springy, athletic. Miller is more of a 4. I think Minott is more of a 3. And just kind of in terms of body type, but in terms of looking at their roster, whether Taurean Prince is here next year or not, they're going to need some more wings to kind of help fill in for them as this roster starts to turn over more and more. Austin Rivers is going to be out, or may be out, I guess, but there's a few other guys that they need some wing depth. And Josh Minott did not play much at all last year, played a lot of G League, but they are very excited about his potential. And so I think that he is, as a very affordable contract, which they need, I think they're going to hold on to him and hope that he kind of emerges this season as another rotation piece for them.
Interesting indeed, man. And final question for you, John. Definitely appreciate the time. There was a report by the New York Daily News that came out last week with obviously Zach LaVine, another guy whose name is coming up in the trade rumors, a former Timberwolves. Now, there's a report by the New York Daily News that's saying that his representation with Clutch Sports is against a potential trade to the Knicks that is a CAA house. I mean, just want to get your thoughts on that. Obviously, you covered LaVine when he was with Tibbs and the Timberwolves. What's that relationship like, and what do you think about that report?
Yeah, the Palace intrigue with agencies and the way they sort of jockey for position around the league is fascinating. I certainly don't have any internal knowledge about what Clutch wants to do versus what, CA with Leon Rose's background there and all of that. But what I do say is that whatever kind of decisions or factors are kind of influencing the Knicks' decision and Zach LaVine's decisions on where all that ends up, I don't think any of it is going to be adversely affected by the Tibbs LaVine situation. Tibbs is notoriously demanding. He likes to get on players and push them and prod them, and some respond well and some don't. But Zach LaVine was always one who responded well to Tibbs. Zach LaVine is a worker, and he grew up with a very hard-nosed taskmaster father who really pushed him through a lot of his workouts and yelled and screamed and did all of those things to get him to the level that he is at right now. And so when Tibbs came to coach Zach, he was very comfortable and used to any kind of approach that way. And I know that I just remember one time after Zach was traded to Chicago, and we were talking to Tibbs about, LaVine. It might have been a game coming up against the Bulls, and hey, how's your relationship with Zach? And Tibbs said that, he and Zach still texted occasionally and kept in touch. And I asked Tibbs at the time, I'm like, can you yell at him via text? Kind of joking, and Tibbs laughed, and he doesn't laugh a lot. Yeah. So that kind of just shows that there is a really good relationship and a good mutual respect there. So if that were to happen, I think that you would see two guys who actually do really fit well in terms of the way they both approach the game and work hard and demand a lot of themselves and each other. So whether that ultimately means a marriage between the Knicks and LaVine, I don't know, but I do know that those two really got along in Minnesota side. I didn't mind pushing each other and sniping at each other a little bit. And so he would fit right in there from the culture standpoint.
Interesting indeed, man. Well, John, we'll have to see how the rest of the offseason plays out, but we definitely appreciate the time, and hopefully we can catch up in Vegas, man, for Summer League.
You got it. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate you having me.
All right, thanks again.
Have a good one, John.
That was John Krasinski, Timberwolves insider for The Athletic. Great guest, man. Always a great guest. Always gives us some valuable tidbits. Sharp mind as well. Make sure you guys are following him. We dropped his Twitter handle there on the screen while he was on, so make sure you guys catch up with John Krasinski. He has a pretty deep dive article on the whole Naz Reid acquisition, or extension rather, and the Timberwolves' approach to bringing Naz Reid back into the fold and rewarding him for a season of hard work. Great job by Naz Reid for getting the bag, Al. Naz Reid gets the bag, man. Gets the bag. Hang tight, Al. Let me get your screen up. Okay, here we go. There we go. Yeah. So, what'd you think about the Reid extension for the Wolves?
I mean, you got what, $443 million tied up at your center position?
That's a big ticket, man.
That is, and I have to cough because I'm like, I just see that number. I mean, I get running it back like John said, but at the same time, that's just a lot of money amongst bigs, man. And
it's a big ticket.
I don't know how you go in there thinking how that's all going to be carved up. I mean, you'd have to expect that either these guys are going to miss some time again. You know, what's the player development like? As John was talking about, the 2 draft picks too, having more size and athleticism in the bigs position. So where are all these minutes coming from? It'll be interesting, man. It'll be interesting to see what the Timberwolves to start off the season. I just feel like they're getting ready for a shakeup. I think internally they're getting ready for a shakeup just because you don't retain a player without the expectation that potentially there is a move down the line. I mean, if you're going to have 3 centers like that, granted, you know, Naz could play power forward and center. It's more so the Towns aspect because he didn't look good at power forward for the Timberwolves. So if you theoretically have 3 centers, how are you going to get? It just comes back to how are you going to get all these guys minutes? Just an interesting sign. What did you think about it?
Yeah, I thought it was kind of a head scratcher because yes, Reid filled a big role for them, and his game has certainly grown. No question about it. I just don't understand. First off, I go back to the Gobert trade. That one confused me because I just felt like all the draft capital that they spent to go get Gobert for a win now situation, they're not a win now team. And so all the draft capital that they gave up to go get Gobert, to me, should have been invested in drafting and player development and putting more of a supporting cast and more roster depth, more flexibility with that roster as Ant-Man continues to develop and mature. And as you go through with Cat, or maybe without Cat down the road, I just thought the Gobert situation was a panic move. It completely surprised me that despite having Gobert, Towns, and Reid, they were a pretty terrible rebounding team in the league. That one certainly shocked me. But, you know, they're certainly playing the get the guy now, figure it out later. We'll see if that approach works. Now, with Reid being on a 2-year deal plus a player option, they have flexibility there. Maybe he leaves to go get an even bigger bag, or maybe they trade him. Maybe they trade Cat. So I don't necessarily think they are stuck, but they've certainly keep pushing pieces into the middle of the table. We'll have to see, man. Like I said, the success of this team overall is just going to continue to depend on Ant-Man's continued rise and how Cat and Gobert can coexist. But he is right. When you make these type of investments, you got to see them through. I said it all the time when it comes to the Knicks. You got to see these investments through, and then there will be a point where you reassess and you retool. So it doesn't seem like they're there just yet with Karl Anthony Towns, but we'll have to wait and see.
And the player that John was talking about, Leonard Miller, who they traded 2 future second rounders to go get at 33, right? It's not a late it's not a late first rounder, but it's not a late second round either. We're talking about what we consider, you know, the late first round, right? So you're traded 2 future picks to go get him, who's 6'10". If you're gonna have Towns who can play the power forward, Naz Reid who can play a little bit of power forward, Gobert is strictly a center, where's Leonard Miller coming in? Because look, we see it throughout the entire NBA. coaches stagger rotations. You know, when Gobert's off, Towns could be on. When they're off, either Naz Reid could be on, or maybe Naz Reid's playing the 4, Cat's playing the 5, Gobert's playing the 5. Like, you just do all this mixing and matching. Now you throw Leonard Miller in there because you're not telling me you're traded 2 future second rounders to add somebody that you really liked in the deep draft to say we're going to just sit you on the bench and you're not going to get any playing time. You at least have to calculate 10 minutes minimum
Significant
to get some experience in there. So where is all this time coming? This Timberwolves team is just interesting because we talked about it on the Knicks where it's like, you got to consolidate this roster. When we had Cam Reddish and everyone, and it's like, you got to consolidate this roster. There's too many people that deserve minutes.
Yeah.
And it's going to be the same thing for the Wolves. And I just don't see how you can start off the season strong where everyone's fighting for minutes. The coach now has to decide who's earning the minutes. You know, practice only shows you so much. You have to see them play during